very glad today to have Cecilia with us to talk about her immigration journey, a bit about her family, how you immigrated to Canada, and the whole story about it.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat today and for me to share my personal story. So how I ended up in Vancouver was that my dad ultimately made a decision for us to move to Canada. And at that time, his older brother also had a family here and they had already immigrated a few years prior to mine. So I think they really helped convince him to make this huge decision. And I was privileged enough to come on a trip before actually moving to Canada permanently. And I had a lot of fun on that trip. So I think I was really looking forward to being able to live in Canada.
How old were you when you were on this trip?
When I immigrated to Canada, I was 9 years old. So this was probably just a year before that.
8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And then so you had some family friends in Canada. That's why your dad into the opportunity or the idea of coming to Canada to immigrate. How did that happen, and then how it changed your life?
Yeah, I think it's a big question because I want to acknowledge that for the parents who do make these decisions, it's a big decision. It takes a lot of courage and it's a huge risk because maybe you come into it sometimes with lenses like, oh, it's going to be a new place, it's filled with opportunity, it's great, but you will never really know until you are physically there, starting a new life. And I think it was helpful to have the support of at least one family, or in this case, it was my uncle and aunt and the 2 cousins. So they were, it was nice to have a familiar face settling down here. But the process from my end, it was very abrupt. It happened quickly. And I think that's also a good thing because nowadays there are certain challenges. You do have to wait a long time for the process to come to completion. But when we did come to Canada, I think we all didn't know what to expect. And my mom and I were along for the ride because we didn't partake in that decision. I went straight into school. I remember the middle of 3rd grade. So coming in as a new kid, absolutely no English, maybe ABCs, but nothing else really. And I have a lot of jokes. Like I can still remember, just like picked up, dropped into this class, and there were probably a handful of Asian looking kids, but not all of them spoke Mandarin. So for me, it was, I did feel like my life just changed in an instant.
So as a kid, how did you feel when you first started to go to school in this new country using a new language, and then everyone else was a stranger to you and you had to start from scratch? How did you feel during that time?
I think after the first period, the initial period of this is very exciting, the novelty kind of wore off, and I think at times it felt a little alienating because there was the language barrier. There was also, I really had trouble making friends. And I think it was mainly because of the language. People, as kids, I think they just didn't really know who I was, but I was trying to say, and they also already formed their groups because it was the middle of the year. So at that time, my parents were also trying to be as supportive as possible, but they were also
Going through the transition.
And they were also facing other challenges that I wasn't even aware of at that time. For example, language barriers. My mom also didn't know English either, so she was also trying to learn and make sense of what this new culture was about. And then my dad he was trying to look for a job. So I think really we were all in survival mode, essentially, right? Trying to find a job, start a business, trying to make enough money to survive and then find a house. And it was a really long process. I don't know, I can't speak for my parents. I don't know if they really feel ever fully integrated, but for myself, it did take a few years.
a few years. And when did you start to feel, oh, things are getting familiar, I'm getting used to the language, the surroundings, and started to really make some friends? When did that happen? Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact moment, but I think a few years after settling in, I finally had some friends that were consistent. Back then, I think every single grade, back then when you change grades, there's usually a different class, so you almost hit a restart button. But there were a few people that really resonated with, and they were super kind to me. And I really appreciated that, because I think that having that support system, it doesn't even have to be a lot, but just a few people, it really, really matters.
So you made friends, and how about your parents later on? How did they feel after a few years? Like, did your dad find a new job? Did your mom learn a bit of English and get used to go around in Vancouver?
Yeah, ultimately they did. My dad, he ran a print shop off of Main Street back in the days. My mom was going to classes and then also helping my dad with the shop. I remember after school, they would pick me up and then bring me to the shop, where my dad would just continue working, and then I would do my homework in the back of the shop. And my mom would prepare dinner. Sometimes we would have dinner at the print shop too. I think we slowly established a routine as a family. I think, however, eventually there were still a lot of financial stress because the business wasn't doing too well. So eventually my dad had to sell the shop and then move back to Taiwan to pursue other job opportunities so we can afford our mortgage and all the other expenses.
So during this time, from the time that you decided to come to Canada, then when you first came to Canada, and then when you were settling in, and then after you settled after a while, how the mental health shift do you think it was for you?
Yeah, I think as a child, I was so focused on trying to fit in with everybody else. And also I was learning the language. I was just really trying to build my life here in Canada. And also when you're growing up, there are other things that you deal with as you are going from a child to a teenager. But I think at that time, I didn't realize that my parents were also dealing with a lot of mental health issues. And my mom, especially at that time, she definitely was having a tough time coping. She didn't have many friends, unfortunately, and she didn't have her family here that she could lean on for support. And at that time, because my dad had to go abroad to make money to keep us all, our household running, I think she just felt so alone. And I feel like, to me at that time, it was so, I was just going about my day, but I had no idea that was happening in the background. And when that did eventually to light, it became obvious that she was having a hard time. My dad, he moved back and he basically took care of her and also me. I was starting high school at that time. And I think there were a lot of challenges because obviously I wasn't the person who was experiencing these mental health illnesses, but in a way, I was also a caregiver because I helped my dad try to take care of my mom, make sure she was comfortable. I attended appointments with the family as well. And at the same time, I still had to study, and then I was very focused academically. And I don't think my parents ever really gave me pressure. You have to get all A's. None of that stuff.
Not the
Thankfully,
typical Asian parents.
Yes, I'm very lucky. My parents also have an arts background, so I think that kind of helped. As a household, we really did value creativity, exploration, to some extent, of course. But at that time, I think that I just naturally took on this additional responsibility of contributing to the household. And Also, on the language side of things, because my mom, she was feeling very alienated. She also picked up some language, but I don't know if it was either she felt a lot of government documents or medical documents that are really complex, or she was not super confident because she didn't have anybody else to verify the information. She would often lean on me to provide translation of documents, and then kind of evolve to even interpreting when we're at an appointment or getting things done like driver's license renewals. And I think I really put a lot of pressure on myself in a sense that I had to contribute. It was important. I had to put my family first, and also that I had to be a good kid because I don't want to be an additional burden on my parents they're trying so hard to get by.
So that seems that you put lots of pressure on yourself because you were being considerate about your parents and that your mom was going through the challenges, and so you were trying your best to help them. If you look back then, is there anything that you wanted to say to your younger self when you were going through all of these as part of the immigration journey?
When I think of my younger self, what I really want to say is you're doing great and that you're doing the best you can with what you have and what you are facing, and also that you are enough. Growing up in an Asian household, also growing up as an Asian Canadian, I think that really influences a lot on how we view ourselves, and also in this success-driven society. I think that when I was growing up, I always had the voices of, oh, you're not Asian enough, because I moved here so young, and maybe people perceive me as, oh, you didn't have to go through as much to integrate. So a lot of times when I was growing up, I would get these voices in my head saying, you're not enough, and you're not Asian enough, you're not Canadian enough, all that. And I think that really gets to you. But at the end of the day, I think, really need somebody to say, like, we see you and you're doing great, you're doing what you can. And I think there is value in the life experiences and the learnings that you accumulate from these journeys that you go on. And it's not just about the outcome all the time and what society's perceives as being successful. So I think that really, if I could tell my younger self, you are enough.
That's really great. I was very touched by what you said and all of the immigration, the process and all the challenges and the journey about it. Do you also want to share a little fun story during your immigration journey, or anything that you want to share with people out there that might be going through the same process or challenges?
Yeah, I could share maybe something a little lighter. When I was younger, I just remember how much my family liked winter. And even till this day, my dad, he'll always talk about love being in Vancouver when it's winter time, love the snow. And then when we chat, he always is drawn to that season. And I always thought, personally, I think summer is the best time in Vancouver. But I was looking through photos the other day. I was kind of unpacking these boxes and I saw these photos of me playing with my two cousins who were here at that time in the snow. We were building a snowman. And then it dawned on me that this was probably the first winter I spent in Canada. And yeah, it just really took me back to the sort of excitement and joy of moving to a new place and knowing that, hey, this is going to be the beginning of a different chapter. That, I don't even know what has been written, but like we're here to write it. And I think that it's important that when we talk about immigration stories, we talk about the adversity, we talk about the challenges, how tough it was. But I think it's also important to put the spotlight on the courage, the perseverance, the resilience that people bring, and also to know that we should value those things within ourselves too.
Yeah, and then I think throughout all those process, people grow and then they become stronger. I hope that your mom later on, after your dad came back from abroad, she was feeling better, and with your dad alongside her, she could cope a bit better?
Yeah, I think that as a family, it's important to have that communication open and to feel connected. And I should mention that maybe during those few years that my dad was not around, I wasn't as close to him, but over this experience, I would say that way closer to both of my parents. And now we have, there are always going to be issues to work out. And I think that a lot of times with not just mental illness, but other kinds of illnesses, it's like a management process. It's a long process to heal, and you might be dealing with it or coping with it throughout your life. And that's kind of how I view my role sometimes, is that I've kind of become a lifelong caregiver. But I think, yeah, any kind of support, and feeling like you have a family, or even it doesn't have to be family, having a network of friends, your chosen family, I suppose. I think that that's important to help you keep at it and just continue down this journey.
It will make you feel that you're not alone. And then you do have someone who supports you, that is very close to you. Right? That it was very beautiful to hear you talking about family, and then how strong your family bonding was during this process. Although your dad went away for a few years, but it was also for the family to bring financial support. But it was really brave of you, and then very supportive of you to be the caregiver to keep everything together. That was so beautiful that you shared with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my story.
Yeah. Anything else that you would like to tell other people if they're going through immigration?
I feel like it's tough to compare my experience in terms of the immigration process because so much time has passed.
Yes.
But I guess another perspective that I can bring is, now that I'm a mom of 2 young kids, I'm learning a lot about how my behaviors can also influence my children. For example, I think obviously I also, as a caregiver, or being part of the family where we did go through some things, I think that I have work to do as well personally on how I deal with or cope with situations. And I think the point that I'm getting at is that as parents, your kids are looking to you all the time. You essentially become this role model for how do I deal with if something doesn't go my way, and then also emotional regulation. How do I cope with my feelings? How do I name my feelings?
Yeah.
And those are not necessarily things that I grew up with during that time. So I think that I'm just really, it's been eye-opening as a parent to learn more about that, learn more about myself. I think a lot of people would resonate with the phrase like, I have to parent myself while I parent my kids. And I think that's totally true because, we have the opportunity to change how things are done and to set the next generation up for success.
I think that's very important what you mentioned, is because even as parents, we keep growing and learning, and also it's very good that we be mindful of how our behavior or thinking or managing our emotion could affect the next generation. So yeah, that's very important that you mentioned that. And thank you so much for sharing all of these wonderful things and the challenging journey that you've been through.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thanks again.